Yeah, I think it's just the monster outlook for the current period, fiscal fourth quarter. It's so interesting to see the rising tides of the rest of the memory and storage market. And you're right to refer to what happened in Korea. But there is a big distinction in what's happening, which is, it's very high HBM focused. It's very much their cloud business, which basically is the traditional hyperscalers and AI infrastructure players, and also the core data center business, which is much more sort of like uniform CPU-based server. The demand is very broad-based. And, beyond that, I think Tim did a really good job to point out the 86% margin. Historically, and this is where Jake's going to come back, because I think he agrees with me, but historically, like, the memory makers have struggled to maintain margins, or at least continue to expand margins infinitely in cycles. 86% is like software margins, right? And they have pricing power right now. All of that is so evident from the numbers.
I was just going to say that, Ed. I mean, you don't think about this in the memory space. Margins, like sustainable margins at more than 85%. Jake, come on in here. How sustainable are margins of 86%?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with Ed. I mean, if you look past prior cycles, margins peaked around 60 or so %. I mean, I think it just emphasizes the level of demand that we're seeing, some structural differences in the market. How sustainable is it? Look, are we going to see software margins for next couple of years? I don't know. I think that's probably the biggest question.
Well, that's more of a question about the cycle than it is about Micron's product?
Yeah, it's more of a question about the cycle, because it's the sustainability of the pricing model. Because if pricing declines even a little bit, that's going to immediately hit gross margins.
Jake, what does it offer that SK Hynix or Samsung don't necessarily offer? Like, what is its niche?
I mean, I think generally speaking, Micron has talked about having lower power in their HBM, their high bandwidth memory. But the thing is, it's very difficult to determine which companies actually have like structural advantages in terms of their technologies and their roadmaps. In the past, Samsung has really benefited from having more scale, more capacity in their manufacturing. And so Micron has a little bit less manufacturing capacity than the other two that you mentioned. But generally speaking, they have competitive products. And so they're able to win designs, especially in HBM, where there's just tremendous accelerating demand.
I am thinking a lot about the semiconductor cycle. We do see the chairman, president, and CEO of Micron, Sanjay Mehrotra, saying Micron is investing at record levels in technology, products, and supply to address our customers' rapidly growing demand. Ed Ludlow, you know this, and we talk with our Ian King a lot about the semiconductor cycles. Dare I say this time is different, or no? I think we talked with Mandeep Singh. Chip companies are going to be careful. They remember when these things blow up or when these cycles and the overbuild and then what happens. So are we going to continue to see kind of high pricing because they're going to be very careful and measured when it comes to the build out?
Yeah, I mean, the textbooks would tell you that memory in particular is boom and bust, right? It is cyclical. But what we're seeing in Micron's numbers is highly analogous with NVIDIA's experience between 2022 and 2025. You have to remind yourself, what were its revenues 1 year ago, right? So they're guiding right now for $50 billion in the fiscal fourth, plus or minus $1 billion, I think, right? So somewhere in the middle is like 49. In the same period 1 year ago, revenue was like $3.4 billion on its cloud division. It's now 13.5 or whatever it comes in at. It's just growing at a tremendous rate. What the market's taking confidence with is the commentary that this demand is accelerating. It has staying power. It is reflective of a future, not just the present.
So, Ed, I want to home in on that. I mean, if you talk to the executives of the companies that are buying from Micron every day. I mean, we're talking Dell, NVIDIA, Lenovo, Microsoft, Amazon, Apple, and the like. To Jake's point about margins right now and it being a commentary on the cycle in terms of sustainability, where do you think we are in the cycle based on what Micron has said about its outlook and the brief comments that we got from Mehrotra in that press release?
Well, demand is always relative to supply. And what is very evident from the scenario outlined in the numbers is pricing power that Micron has. It will be really interesting if on the sell side during the analyst call, they ask if those higher projections on revenues are based on units, because more supply is coming online and they're able to sell more goods in very simple terms, or if it's reflective of higher pricing. Revenues can go up if you charge more per unit. what is still true is that memory, specifically high bandwidth memory in the AI context, is the bottleneck. DRAM, high bandwidth memory is just layers of DRAM. And there are still competing forces, right? The smartphone market, the PC market, and then the data center market. You made the observation with the guys on the team at the close that actually in the quarter gone, there were really significant beats, and you went through each division, right? Well, similar story. Was there outperformance there because Micron priced higher, or because they magically found more DRAM to sell?
Yeah, to that point, Ed, they're not the most important divisions, but I mean, when we're talking beats, they were like doubling what analysts had projected in some of those categories. And they're smaller categories, but they were doubling them.
Yeah, but again, the answer's not in the earnings release or the statement from Mehrotra. It's going to come in the call, and I don't know. Let Jake weigh in on that. For me, it's always like on the consumer electronics side, and that's come out very recently with Apple. Right, Apple will raise prices per an interview Cook gave to the Wall Street Journal because of the commodities cost. Commodities in this case also applies to memory. You're going to hear from the guy that's in charge of a key supply of memory. And you know, if they are having to raise prices at the end market, consumer electronics, does that reflect that the source of supply have decided to raise prices too?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what Ed's pointing out really is just that because supply is so limited, you have these fabs, right? They are mostly at pretty much 100% utilization. In past cycles, what you've seen is some dark corners of these fabs that don't have tools running wafers. Though that doesn't really, that's not really applicable in this cycle. So basically, these fabs are running at full capacity. Some of the standard DRAM is being taken offline for high bandwidth memory. Mm-hmm. So you're tightening the entire ecosystem for memory, and that's just what's driving this pricing power. And that's all three players who are acting pretty much the exact same way. And so when you talk about cycles, we're talking about pricing more so than we're talking about, you know, bit growth or unit growth, something like that. I don't really think that what we're seeing in terms of guidance, the beat and the guidance, that's units. I think the vast majority of that's going to come from pricing.
So, yeah, and I think it, you know, and makes a really good point. Like this whole idea that, right, higher revenues on its own is just a number. But because when things cost more, that doesn't necessarily mean you're selling more, right? And that isn't what you're selling. If you're selling more, that's an indication of demand. Is that top for you too in the earnings call right now? And I just want to remind everybody, we did see Micron up as much as 11% in the aftermarket, now about a 9% gain. So that's pretty hefty.
Yeah, I think the most important thing the most important things, I would say there's two things. First of all is supply, you know, what Micron comments in terms of their supply plans. SK Hynix recently talked about getting to 1 million wafer starts per month by the end of the decade, or around that time frame. That means that if Micron wants to maintain their bit share, they're going to have to act in a somewhat similar manner in terms of their capacity expansions. The other thing, and that would obviously have an impact on price because it is a little bit more of a commodity-like market, even if there are some structural changes compared to prior cycles. The other thing to think about is these long-term contracts. You know, we've seen different comments about this. Anthropic on Monday. There's talk in the news about 3-year contracts from Microsoft for some of these memory supplies. So the thing to think about is, you know, what's the level of these contracts? How much is actually allocated? Is there floor pricing? Is it variable pricing? So, you know, how many bits are allocated for this year and next year? Those are going to be the main questions that investors are going to be asking, but Micron might not be able to answer them in that level of detail.